Someone came the other day and asked that age-old question that comes up so often. How do I know when it's my divine self? And it takes us back to that dilemma that's been voiced over these last days. You know, we're like an onion that's been peeled. Our karma has been burned, our conditioning has been stripped away, and our belief systems have been shredded, leaving us in this empty space where the onion was, and yet we're told we have to know who we are, or as Ramana Maharshi has said, you have to come to that place where you can state, I am that. And this poses a dilemma for us. Have you ever heard of that saying, you have to act the fool to fool a fool who's trying to fool you? And it reminds of those characters that we've met along the way, because there are so many stories of them. You know, Birbal or Mullah Nasruddin or Latif the thief, and so on. There are others, Hoja, many stories of these so-called fools. And let's see what several of those stories do for us, because it brings up a question as we attempt to reconcile this dilemma for ourselves. The first is that story about King Akbar, who sent out messengers to all the people in his kingdom, asking them to present portraits of him, showing the real Akbar, and whoever was deemed to have the best portrait would get a bag of gold. So King Akbar went from town to town, and people lined up with the portraits they'd made of him, until finally he came to a certain village, and in the line was a young boy who came up and finally presented King Akbar with a package. And when King Akbar opened the package, what he held up in front of him was not a portrait, because none of the portraits had met his favor, but in front of him was a mirror. And immediately King Akbar burst into laughter, and he said to this young man, yes, well, this is hardly a portrait of myself, but it is what has been asked for, and that is something that represents the real me. And so King Akbar gave this young boy the ring of his finger and said, come to me in a few years' time, and I will make you my advisor. And that's exactly what happened. Birbal became the famous comic wise advisor to King Akbar. And then there's that story of Mullah Nasruddin. In that time, when there were a group of scholars traveling from place to place, debating with those who were said to be wise in the various places, and they always won the debate somehow. But it so happened that this group of scholars was coming to Mullah Nasruddin's town, so the mayor came to the mullah, considering him to the most wise man in the town, to debate with these scholars. And so the mayor said to Mullah Nasruddin, well, we'd better study the methods of these scholars so that you'll know how to handle them when they get here. Mullah Nasruddin said, I don't need to know. Don't even bother. So when it came for the time for the debate, all the townspeople and many gathered around to hear this famous discussion. And the scholars, of course, posed questions to Mullah Nasruddin. The first of those questions was, Mullah, tell us, where is the center of the earth? And Mullah contemplated for a moment, and he said, you see that donkey over there? You see where its right foot is standing? Well, that's the center of the earth. And they all scratched their head and said, but, measure it if you would like to. And then they asked one of the other scholars, said, well, tell us, Mullah, how many stars are there in the sky? And the Mullah contemplated for a moment and he said, well, you see that donkey? It's as many as there are hairs in his tail, and feel free to count them if you'd like to. And so they thought some more. And the scholar said, well, tell us, Mullah, how many means of perception are there in mankind? And the Mullah said, well, pointing to one of the scholars, as many as there are hairs in your black beard, and we can count them if you'll allow us to pull them one by one. Well, of course, the scholars were totally bamboozled by this, and they went off and had a little cogitation, and they all came back to the Mullah and asked him could they become his students. And finally, there's that story about the really great teacher who was just an ordinary storekeeper. And the people who gathered around him were always told that you had to be real, and to be real you just had to be ordinary. So amongst the group that came around this particular wise sage was a merchant who travelled the world plying his wares. One day he came to his teacher and told him that he had to make a journey to do business in a far-off place, and so taking his leave, and of course his teacher bade him farewell and wished him well. Well, when the merchant arrived in this place, he was of course quite well known in his own right, and he was invited to a great reception, and at that reception there were diplomats and scholars and all kinds of pundits and all. And so when the merchant came to this reception and he was moving amongst the crowd, all of a sudden he saw a little group over in a corner over there, and he could hear this little group laughing and joking amongst themselves. So he went over to see what it was about. And to his very great surprise, there, sitting in the midst of that group, was his own beloved master. But here he was, his master, with dreadlocks, beads around his neck, and amulets on his knees. And of course the merchant was absolutely shocked and somewhat horrified to see this, because the people around him were obviously mesmerized by what he was saying and doing. And so the merchant waited his opportunity when the crowd had cleared a little bit, and he went up to his master and he said, Master, I don't understand. You've told us all of these years that we have to be real, and to be real is to be ordinary, and look at you. Please, Master, won't you tell me why? So, we need to finish this story. What did this master, this real ordinary man, say to the merchant in response to his question? Why? How do we solve this dilemma? Like the onion that's been peeled, burned, stripped, shredded, standing in the place every moment where the onion was, and yet presented with the question, who are you? You have to know who you are. You have to stand and say, I am that. How do we solve this dilemma? What did the sage say to the merchant?
Seems like it's all in the it's all in the perception of it. So if he's like that without any ego attached to it, he is ordinary.
Right. So we go back to this saying, we have to be the fall that falls the fall is trying to fall us. What does it mean for us?
It's like you've got to get attention before you can be heard.
Okay.
And we need to do different things sometimes to get someone's attention.
Absolutely.
It doesn't really matter what you do or how you are, as long as your intention is good and that you're trying to pass something to someone else.
Yes, or could it be that we have to look at this space where the onion was, and in that space we now find ourselves with an intense presence, and that's all. And that's all. No intention, no purpose, not even what we would perceive as an identity in whatever garb it is. So what is this presence?
It's whatever's needed at the time.
Absolutely it is. Haven't you found? It's whatever that's needed at the time.
If you get out of your own way, there it is.
There it is. So how does this solve our dilemma? To answer the question, you have to know who you are and what you do, or state, I am that. What is this presence? What does it do? If we can answer this question, we can answer the question as to who are you, or know who we are, what we do. And without saying it, state in every moment, I am that. For that, we have to be so intensely present to be aware of what it is that presence is doing. Only then can we answer this question. Can you do it? Can you live so intensely that it hurts? So present that every atom is screaming with alertness and receptivity? Every moment? The answers are there for us, and they're only to be found in the place where the onion was, in this state of such intense presence that it hurts. Can you feel it?
Mm-hmm.
We feel it in meditation, don't we? Why do we make a separation? Like this beautiful being who came the other day. How do I know when it's my divine self? Where's the separation? We know that it's in a heightened state of awareness, like in meditation. But why isn't it in our ordinary moments? Thank you, thank you.